School-related gender-based violence remains preoccupying, affecting millions of children, especially girls. School-related gender-based violence is defined as acts or threats of sexual, physical, or psychological violence occurring in and around our schools, perpetrated as a result of social norms and stereotypes. In today's edition of the program Women and Leadership on Canal International, we are exploring the extent, causes, repercussions, and how best we could tackle the problems at the level of schools. The program, again, is Women and Leadership on Canal International. School-related gender-based violence devastates lives of millions globally. Cameroon inclusive. It's a growing phenomenon in Cameroon, yes, and that's why we chose to talk about today's edition of the program Women and Leadership, and we have invited just the right persons, those who have been investigating in that domain to ensure that they address the problem in the rightful way, or they tag or hold government accountable to the problem that continue to affect millions of people around the world, especially children, and again in Cameroon is a disturbing problem. I think the conversation will begin just right after the jingle. And let the conversation begin right here with me in the studio. I have two dynamic women, those who have been investigating and working in the domain of school-related gender-based violence. I'll start with someone who's right by my left-hand side. She's called Tilda Ndicha Kumichi. She is the CEO of Gender Empowerment and Development. So welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's very good to be here this morning, and we are really thankful that in Canal you're putting programs like this that can empower the woman. Thank you.
Now what's your reaction to a ministerial text that was signed recently by the Minister of Secondary Education banning corporal punishment in schools? Because I know it's in line with human rights and it's your domain.
Yeah, I think it is actually collaborative work that we have worked over the years, because we have been sensitizing the public, the ministries, and talking about removing punishment, corporal punishment from schools. And so, you know, we are so proud, because our approach to try to discipline children, we think discipline is better than punishment. And corporal punishment is something that intimidates the child. So for me, Gender Empowerment and Development is very happy. We are thankful that this happened from the ministry, meaning that our work is being recognized and also is making an impact in the field.
Now we equally have Christelle Anjab. She is the Program Assistant on Gender Empowerment. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
All right. Now you are from the Northwest region of Cameroon, right?
I'm from the Northwest region.
All right.
Yes.
And I'm like tempted to ask you now, how are women coping for over 6 years with the crisis?
Thank you so much,
To what
Maureen.
extent are they affected? We're talking about health and other domains.
Yes, I would say that the crisis has really caused a lot on women and girls. And yes, I'm from the Northwest, but because of the crisis as well, I had to relocate to Yaoundé. And the impact of this crisis is really felt on IDP women and girls that you find in Yaoundé. There is a lot of prostitution, there's a lot of, they don't have access to all these services, health and all of that. They are so frustrated. And recently we realized that many of them who have come from these regions work like house girls, and they are really maltreated
to a lot.
I
mean,
and they are maltreated because of the culture shock that they find themselves in, coming to a purely French-speaking zone, and so it's really a struggle for them.
All right, thank you so much for coming to Canal International. This is the first time I'm inviting you to a panel like this. We'll have the opportunity to talk about the situation of women in the Northwest and Southwest regions of Cameroon. Now let's come back to our topic of the day. We are talking about school-related gender-based violence, and I want to start by defining what is gender, because I have this disturbing problem. I have people who can't really define gender. What is gender?
Thank you so much. Gender is very simple. Gender is talking about the social construction in the society, learned behaviors, what you have been socialized into. That is gender. And this simply means that when a woman or a man is delivered, is born, we born male and female, and learning how to behave like a female or a male is through the socialization patterns. Now, there is a confusion because many times people, when they say gender, people think that it's a women issue. Now, it's not a women issue. Gender has to do with all the different subgroups of the society, meaning the poor, the rich, the handicapped, the straight, the women, the men, the boys and girls. It has to do with everybody. There are some people who discriminate against people just because they are poor. And so people conflict gender with sex, but sex is not gender because sex is biological, cannot be changed, but gender can be changed.
All right, now, Crystal, now how do you define gender equity? And how is it different from gender equality?
Okay, that's a very good point there. Gender equality is giving opportunities, equal opportunities to all the various forms of gender that Tilda rightly cited. Gender equity has to do with fairness, kind of discriminatory fairness that you need to attribute maybe in our working environment or even in school. If you see, for example, let me give an example. If there are many more women reporters in Canal and they need more reporters, you know, just to have that fairness, that equity, it will be advisable to recruit maybe some men to create that balance. So equality has to do with opportunities, giving to all gender, considering everybody's rights, considering everybody's responsibility and contributions, while equity has to do with discriminatory fairness.
You know, what I realize is that a lot of people are confused.
Yes,
When you want to talk about gender equity,
and
gender equality, there's some mixture somewhere. And since we're talking about school-related gender-based violence, I thought it wise I'll start by defining what is gender. But now we're talking about school-related gender-based violence. What's this all about?
School-related gender-based violence is a concept that came up as a result of discovery that we made some time ago, that the school environment is not a safe haven for children. And when we talk of environment here, we mean moving from home to the society and then to school. We think that the educational sector in our country is affected in different ways. There is open violence in school, there's school-related gender-based violence, there's violence on students because they are from have-not families, and so the rich people, the teachers would prefer to deal with the rich, and then there's also violence on students who are not smart. Sometimes they're exposed because you need to spend a bit more time. In fact, there's structural violence too, because if a class is intended for 30 people and you have 50, how do you manage the students who are not smart in this school, in this class? We are not able to do one-on-one with the students, and for us, that's structural violence. There's also violence from the proprietors on the teachers. In fact, there's one school we discovered in Yaoundé where if a teacher comes late, they cut 2,000 francs from their salary, and the salary was how much? 40,000. If you are teaching in the nursery section and you don't have to spend time to play with the children, they cut 1,000 francs. That is violence. That is violence because they have not asked, why did you come late today? Why were you not able to play? That you are a teacher doesn't say that you will always be available, you know. And also there are some schools where teachers are being paid heavily, but they don't do the job. They inflict violence on the students and also on the proprietors because they don't do their job. They prefer to get the money. They are also like in public schools where most teachers just go and turn around and prefer to go back home and get 2,000 and pay and teach evening classes. So there is a lot of violence that is going on, and I would like to end what I'm saying by talking about what happens in the home. Many children today are not doing well in school, not because they are not smart, but because they are heavily loaded with work at the level of the home. And so when they get to school, they're tired, they don't think straight, they cannot perform as they would have. And also sometimes the teachers or the school counselors are only interested in guidance counseling, not looking at the social and psychological factors that surrounds the child. If a psychological counselor were in that school, looking at a girl who is always sleeping, or a boy who is always coming late, or a boy who is so stubborn, they will be able to discuss psychologically with that child and decode what is happening.
Now, do you think such acts are intentional? I mean, what people do in society, inflicting violence, do you think they're doing it intentionally, or they don't know what it's all about? They go about inflicting the pain on people without necessarily knowing that they're actually
Some acts are
violating
intentional and some are
violating
not.
rights. Do you think it's intentional? Because it's a growing phenomenon today.
Yes, I would say some acts are intentional and some are ignorant. They are ignorant because I remember we just had a training, and when we're talking about school-related gender-based violence, someone had to identify and say, oh, now I know I was violated. So I went through that phase without knowing that that was really violence, and this is how it affected me. So I think some of it is intentional, and some of it is because of our beliefs, our culture, the way we were raised. We think it's normal. So if you think that for a child to learn something, you need to beat that child because you were raised like that, and you think that being who you are now is because you were beaten, and now you want to inflict the same punishment on children, and you think that, okay, this is the way to raise them up.
And do you think parents really know their limits? Do you think parents know the limits of inflicting or when they're violating their own children? Do you think they know what you're doing?
I am not sure, because you cannot give what you don't have. And GID's priority is really to involve parents and sensitize them and tell them that, look, this is what you do. What you do has these consequences. Because some of them will really beat these children, and at the end, they'll expect the child to bring back results. Like, for example, one of our schools here.
So we have recalcitrant children too.
Yeah, we do. Of course.
That
you cannot ignore that. You cannot ignore that. But on a general scope, like, for example, we just saw some images of a child who was well beaten. And how did the teacher notice it? Because she wanted to hold the child's hand and say, come and stand this way. And the child made eye. So she removed the child's shirt and noticed many wounds. So what happened? The father beat me because I turned on the TV. Okay, now that is punishment. Because you turned on the TV, they had to beat you that way. And the whole day he was sleeping in class, the whole day he could not assimilate anything. The consequences. So some parents don't know, and some parents do know what they are doing.
Some parents are actually just handing down what they had.
Exactly.
Yeah, what they got from them.
Now how big is a school-related gender-based violence? How big is the problem in Cameroon today?
It is huge. Based on the fact that there is a lot of ignorance, based on the fact that people don't know their rights, based on the fact that people don't offer their obligations. The few that know their rights don't want to give their obligations. For example, there are some students who know that they have a right to education, but they hardly ever perform their own obligation of passing exams, respecting teachers, being in school at the right time. You know, they don't. So I think the problem is huge because it doesn't only center around the school environment. To make schools a safe haven for children starts from home. Society people are involved. The parents, okay, let me quote an example. How many parents really do take time to look at their children's books?
No.
They don't. They don't spend time. They have transferred the responsibility of raising their children from themselves to the teachers. Some children are raised completely by teachers. The parents don't have any time with them. And now the working class woman, some of them, they take more time to do their things. They spend all time in church, spend all time at workplace, and then at the end of the day, they don't have time for their children, and to them, the nanny or the teacher is taking care. That is a problem.
Now, do you have statistics where you talk of the problem being like preoccupying is as huge as it needs concern from government right below?
Yes, we have carried out different studies at different levels. The last study we had, currently we've not done it again, but the last one we had, we did it in the center and in Littoral. Okay. We also have some that we did in the Northwest and the Southwest. And in fact, when we talked with students, the degree of violence that they experience is high. But when we talked with teachers, teachers also expressed the violence that they are facing from students, from fellow teachers, from the school proprietor, and even from the structural level. However, we discovered that there is also a lot of ignorance on what they're supposed to do. And so you cannot offer what you don't have. Therefore, Gender Empowerment and Development, we are trying to do massive sensitization, public awareness creation like what we are doing now. And we are working with the media because we think that the media will help us. For people, the problem, Maureen, is that there is no self-realization. Many people don't even realize that they have a problem. And so most of the students are reactive to situations, and parents, for example, let me quote an example of a parent whose child go home, like the people who live in affluence. The children go home and report to them that I was beaten by a student, by a teacher. The parents do not take time to understand why this child, what they did.
What provoked the teacher?
Yes, they only go and scold the teacher in front of the student, they humiliate the teacher, or they go and influence the proprietor to humiliate the teacher. And then sometimes, with that relationship, you have already created a gap between the student and the teacher, and there is no way these students will respect those teachers. Now we have internet. Many of our teachers are not evolving. They don't spend time to do further research. What happens is that some teachers are actually, we discovered this, are actually just using the lesson notes that they were given in school.
Maybe as 10 years old.
Yes,
10 years ago,
students are so evolving. Students are evolving. They go into the internet, they search. When there was a day a child was beaten in school because they challenged the teacher. The teacher asked a question and gave an answer. The student further deepened into the answer and he was beaten.
All right, now let's look at the different forms of school-related social or gender-based violence. What are the different forms?
We have, I would say, 4 major.
Okay.
We have physical violence, we have psychological violence, we have sexual violence, and there is this drug abuse phenomenon that is uprising very high here in Cameroon that we are looking very strongly into. So when you talk about physical violence, of course, you know the stabbing, the beating, the scratching, throwing sand in another child's eyes. That one is very, very common when it comes to the primary school. And when it comes to the sexual violence, you have sexual languages, you have rape, you have harassment, sexual harassment, and all of that. Then when it comes to the psychological, of course, you have bullying. A lot of bullying is going on, and threats. There's this phenomenon in schools when you do something, the person say, "I'm waiting for you." How they call it, rotu, after school meet. You know, you're already frightened the whole day. You cannot listen to anything, and you have that a lot in schools. When you go to the schools and you're like, "What are you people going through? What is happening?" They'll start shouting, "Madam, rotu, rotu." Our classmates are saying that they'll meet us after school, and now you have the drugs. And more and more we're discovering the various ways that the students use these drugs, and you have the glue that they take and they inhale, which is quite cheap, so they can that is very accessible, and the tramadol, and then the alcohol in their drinks, in their juice, and everything. Whiskey. You see a child with a Fanta bottle, you think that it's a normal Fanta bottle, as they call it, coca allergy, and they put a lot of things. So it's really the forms of violence are really on the rise, and as time
In schools.
in schools, we're talking about in schools, not
Primary, secondary,
not
high
to
school.
forget
all levels.
All levels.
not to forget the sharp objects that they come with. So and I think schools have brought different ways of searching the students, but I don't know how they still manage
Why is
to
it
get
so difficult for
into
schools to manage the problem?
It
Why?
is difficult.
We are looking at the root causes right
Yes.
now and trying to see the factors that contribute or promote that.
The schools are not able, it's difficult for them because some schools lack the willingness to do it.
Okay.
Some schools some parents don't collaborate with the schools to be able to identify and curb such violence. And then there is a new form of violence, the structural violence. For example, there are some schools where handicapped students cannot access classes because the way they constructed, nobody thought of them. That's structural violence. There's also the issue of small classrooms with many students. One teacher cannot handle up to 50 students and be able to reach them. There's also the issue of poor hygienic conditions within the school. And so I think that the schools are not able to handle first because there is a lot of ignorance even that this exists. My dear, you know that in those days they thought that punishment in school, letting the children just come the way they are, was a way of life. But nowadays the children are, let me give you one course. I don't know how it is in Littoral, but in Yaoundé, in center where we live, the schools are constructed within the off licenses. There are brothels close by. There are churches all over. How do you expect students to concentrate in such a classroom? And so when they don't concentrate, as they're sitting there, they're learning pervasive behaviors from outside. And when they see, they can easily stab you because they want to go out and be free, do what the government is directly responsible. I will say
Who's
that.
responsible then?
Yes, when I give my statement, it will come out.
Okay.
Government, there's a law in Cameroon that states that school, educational establishments should, the proxy of educational establishment and businesses. And I think that one time ago, the rector of Yaoundé and Boya used this law to clean the university environment.
Yes.
So government at least has done a step on this law. But then where I would say that there is lack of government action is in monitoring and evaluation, in following